I used to believe that loyalty was something you built slowly, brick by brick, through shared mornings and whispered plans about the future, through 10 years of marriage that felt ordinary in the safest way. The kind of ordinary that makes you think nothing could ever break it. Daniel and I had a rhythm: Sunday pancakes with too much syrup, folding laundry together while arguing about what to watch, laughing at inside jokes no one else would understand, and falling asleep with our legs tangled like we were still newlyweds instead of two exhausted parents. We had 2 children who believed their father hung the moon, a house with a blue door I painted myself the summer we moved in, and joint bank accounts that made me feel secure because everything had both our names on it, as if love itself were legally binding. So when I found the hotel receipt in the pocket of his blazer, crisp, deliberate, impossible to misread, it didn't feel like a dramatic explosion. It felt like the floor quietly giving way beneath my feet. 2 guests, 1 king bed, local address. My hands didn't shake. They went numb, as if my body refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I stood there in our bedroom, surrounded by framed family photos and the faint hum of the dryer down the hall, and realized that betrayal doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives folded neatly in a pocket you've reached into 100 times before. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I watched, and in the weeks that followed, I noticed everything I had been too trusting to see. The way he angled his phone away from me, the new password where there had never been one, the sudden late meetings that required cologne at 9 p.m., the unfamiliar name lighting up his screen just before midnight. And when I finally asked him, softly, while pairing our daughter's socks at the kitchen table, "Is there someone else?" He didn't deny it, didn't apologize, didn't even look shattered. He just exhaled like a man tired of pretending and said, "I didn't plan for this to happen," as though our marriage were a scheduling conflict instead of a life. And in that moment, with the refrigerator humming and our son laughing in the living room, I understood that the real end of a marriage isn't the judge's signature or the boxes packed by the door. It's the instant you realize the person you built your world around has already begun building another one without you. Divorce didn't shatter me all at once. It unraveled me thread by thread, and the cruelest part wasn't even the affair. It was discovering that while I was still fighting for us, Daniel had already been strategizing his escape like a man quietly evacuating a burning building, he said himself. During mediation, when my lawyer slid a thick stack of financial statements across the polished oak table, I thought it was routine paperwork, just numbers and signatures to formalize the end of something already broken, but then I saw the balances. Credit cards nearly maxed, a personal loan I never approved, transfers from our joint savings account that had been made in careful incremental amounts over months so subtle I never noticed the bleeding. $87,000 tied to my name. My credit score already dropping. Payment notices sent to an email he knew I barely checked. And suddenly the betrayal felt architectural, not emotional. Like he hadn't just cheated on me, he had engineered a collapse and made sure I would be the one standing under it. He sat across from me during those meetings looking composed, almost bored, tapping his pen lightly while explaining that the money had gone toward investments and business opportunities. Phrases polished enough to sound reasonable, but vague enough to hide the truth. He had been furnishing a new apartment, paying deposits, booking trips, building comfort somewhere else while I was budgeting groceries and clipping coupons to stretch what I thought was our shared plan. I remembered the nights he told me we had to tighten spending, how he'd frowned when I mentioned replacing the washing machine, how he'd said we needed to think about the children's future, all while siphoning that future into a different life. And the humiliation of realizing I had signed tax returns beside him, trusted his spreadsheets, believed his reassurances when he said, "I've got everything under control," burned deeper than the infidelity itself. By the time the divorce was finalized, I wasn't walking away with a settlement. I was walking away with debt collectors, minimum payments, and 2 children who couldn't understand why their father's new home had brand new furniture, while ours suddenly felt like it was shrinking under the weight of overdue notices. That was when something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. because I understood that if I didn't sever every remaining tie, he would continue using my stability as a safety net for his recklessness, and so I canceled every card, froze every joint line, removed every authorized user, and watched the last financial thread between us snap, knowing that if he wanted to build a shiny new life, he would have to do it without my credit, my name, or my quiet endurance, holding it up from the shadows. 6 months after the divorce papers were stamped and filed away like the official obituary of my marriage, an envelope arrived in my mailbox that looked far too elegant for the life I was living at the time. Thick cream cardstock, gold embossed lettering, my name written in calligraphy as if it were an honor instead of an insult. And the moment I saw Daniel's full name printed beside Marissa's, I felt something cold and almost amused settle in my chest instead of the heartbreak I might have expected. He wasn't just remarrying, he was staging a performance, and I was clearly meant to be part of the audience. The audacity of it made me laugh out loud in my kitchen, the sound echoing against unpaid bills stacked near the toaster, because this was the same man who had told me he needed time to process the end of our relationship. The same man who claimed the divorce was emotionally devastating, and yet here he was planning a lavish wedding barely half of a year later, as though our decade together had been nothing more than a rehearsal dinner. My friends were outraged on my behalf. They wanted me to block him, shred the invitation, send it back with a sarcastic note. But the more I stared at the delicate script requesting the honor of your presence, the more I understood that this invitation wasn't about kindness or closure. It was about optics. Daniel wanted witnesses. He wanted proof that he had upgraded, that he had moved forward gracefully, that the narrative would paint him as the man who found true love after an unhappy marriage, not the man who quietly drained accounts and rewrote history while I scrambled to rebuild. I could almost picture the scene he imagined, me declining, staying home bitter and wounded, giving him the satisfaction of believing he still had the power to hurt me. But what he didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn since walking out the door, was that the woman he left behind had been reforged in ways he would never fully understand. I had spent those 6 months working late shifts, negotiating payment plans, repairing my credit line by line, rediscovering how strong I could be when there was no one left to rely on but myself. And somewhere between exhaustion and determination, my grief had transformed into something sharper and steadier. So instead of burning the invitation, I placed it neatly on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and RSVP'd yes with calm, deliberate handwriting. Because if he wanted me there as a silent symbol of his triumph, he was about to discover that I no longer played the role he had written for me. The wedding was everything Daniel loved. Excessive, polished, designed to impress. Held at a sprawling vineyard estate just outside the city where rows of white roses lined a stone walkway and crystal chandeliers glittered beneath a silk-draped reception tent, the kind of venue that whispered money even before the valet took your keys. And as I stepped out of my car in a simple, elegant dress I had bought on sale but wore like couture, I could feel the subtle ripple of recognition move through the guests who hadn't expected me to actually come. The air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers, and a live string quartet played something soft and romantic, as though this union had been born in purity instead of secrecy. And when I spotted Marissa in the distance, glowing in lace, her hand resting possessively on Daniel's arm, I studied them the way you observe strangers whose story you already know the ending to. Daniel looked proud, almost triumphant, shaking hands too firmly, laughing a little too loudly, introducing her as though he had discovered something rare and extraordinary. Yet there was a tightness around his eyes I recognized from years of marriage. The look he got when bills were due, or when he was trying to maintain control of a situation that was quietly slipping from his grasp. I moved through the room calmly, greeting his parents with polite warmth, accepting the cautious hugs of mutual friends who didn't know whether to pity me or admire me, and when I finally stood face to face with Marissa, her smile was bright but brittle, her fingers curling around mine in a handshake that lingered just long enough to feel territorial, as if she needed to confirm that she had won something. Throughout the ceremony and into the reception, I noticed small fractures beneath the glittering surface, Daniel checking his phone repeatedly, whispering to the best man near the bar, Marissa's expression flickering with irritation before smoothing back into bridal bliss, and at one point I overheard hurried murmurs about a vendor needing payment confirmation and a hotel reservation that hadn't processed for the honeymoon suite. Details most guests missed, but I caught instantly because I knew his patterns. I knew the way he juggled finances with overconfidence and short-term fixes. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very credit lines he once relied on, the ones tied to my name, were no longer available to cushion his ambition, and as champagne glasses clinked and laughter swelled under the golden lights, I could sense the faint, invisible tremor running beneath his perfect evening, like a hairline crack in glass that only someone who had lived inside his world would recognize. By the time Daniel stood to give his toast, the room was warm with candlelight and champagne, laughter echoing softly against crystal and linen, and he held his glass with the same practiced confidence he used to hold my hand in public. Firm, assured, performative. As he began speaking about second chances and finding love when you least expect it, his voice steady and charismatic, painting himself as a man who had bravely closed one chapter to step into something brighter, something more aligned, and the guests responded exactly as he anticipated, nodding, smiling, some even dabbing their eyes as though they were witnessing a triumphant love story instead of the carefully edited sequel to a betrayal. Then he said it. Some chapters close so better ones can begin. And as applause filled the tent, his eyes found mine across the room, not by accident, but with intention, because he wanted to measure the impact, to confirm that I had heard him rewrite our history in a single poetic sentence. I felt every heartbeat in my body slow rather than race, a calm clarity settling over me like still water, and without raising my voice or asking for attention, I stood up, smoothing my dress as dozens of heads turned instinctively toward the unexpected movement. I didn't glare, didn't tremble, didn't allow even a flicker of anger to surface because anger would have given him the drama he could dismiss. Instead, I lifted my glass slightly, met his gaze with the familiarity of someone who knew all his weaknesses and none of his illusions, and said evenly, "I truly hope this marriage has a stronger financial foundation than the last one." The sentence wasn't loud, but it carried. Not because of volume, but because of precision. And the reaction was immediate and palpable. The applause died mid-clap, forks paused halfway to mouths, his mother's smile faltered, the best man shifted uncomfortably, and Marissa's expression froze in that brittle bridal grin that no longer reached to her eyes. Daniel's color drained subtly, just enough for those paying attention to notice because he understood exactly what I meant. I hadn't exposed private details, hadn't aired accusations or listed debts, but I had placed a mirror in front of him in the most public way possible, reminding him, and perhaps himself, that foundations matter, that stability cannot be faked with flowers and string quartets, and after letting the silence settle long enough to be felt, but not long enough to become spectacle, I lowered myself back into my chair, took a slow sip of champagne, and allowed the weight of that single, measured truth to do what years of arguments never could. I didn't stay for the cake cutting or the staged photographs under sparklers. I slipped out quietly while the band transitioned into something upbeat, the night air cool against my skin as if the world itself were exhaling with me. And as I drove away from the vineyard with its glowing lights shrinking in my rearview mirror, my phone began vibrating relentlessly in the passenger seat. Messages from mutual friends asking what had happened, missed calls from numbers I hadn't saved, even a text from Daniel that simply read, "Was that really necessary?" And for the first time in months, I felt no urge to defend myself, no need to explain, no temptation to reopen wounds that had finally begun to scar over. In the days that followed, fragments of information reached me the way gossip always does, in hushed tones and carefully worded check-ins. Whispers about a honeymoon delayed due to processing issues, about vendors requiring immediate transfers, about tension that lingered after the reception lights dimmed, and I realized that my sentence hadn't destroyed anything. It had merely exposed what was already fragile. Daniel called twice more that week, his voicemails clipped and restrained, trying to frame the situation as embarrassment rather than accountability, but I let them expire unheard because closure, I had learned, doesn't come from winning arguments or watching someone else stumble. It comes from reclaiming the parts of yourself you allowed someone else to manage, misuse, or underestimate. Canceling those cards months earlier hadn't just been a financial decision. It had been the first boundary I drew without apology. The first declaration that my name, my credit, my stability were no longer communal property to be leveraged for someone else's convenience. And standing at that wedding, delivering that single composed sentence was simply the final confirmation that I no longer feared his narrative. What surprised me most wasn't the silence that followed my words, or the discomfort that rippled through the guests. It was the profound calm that settled in my chest afterward, the realization that I didn't need revenge elaborate enough to ruin him, because life built on shortcuts eventually collects its own debts. That night, when I tucked my children into bed and turned off the lights in the small but peaceful home I was rebuilding piece by piece, I understood that the real victory wasn't public humiliation or whispered scandal. It was the steady rhythm of a future funded by my own discipline, protected by my own boundaries, and untouched by the chaos he once brought into it. And in that quiet, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years: free. Subscribe to our channel to watch such videos.